Welcome everybody. We are just a couple minutes from starting at 11. And if you are a returning attendee, you know that we are just going to do a few housekeeping details here at the top. We are very excited and very thankful for this conversation today that we get to have with some amazing speakers and experts on youth sport. With that, right before we get started, we also have some exciting news. We have just started a new podcast called The Huddle. We will be sharing daring stories and tackling sports issues head on. And our first episode dropped just today, and we are going to link that in the chat for you. So after the show, I encourage you all to give it a listen and let us know what you think. Scott, please take it away.
Hey, thanks, Kendall. Welcome everyone to our latest show, our latest Global Sport Matters Live. Very happy to be here with you today. I want to give you a brief overview of what we're going to do today. But first, I want to talk about what's going on next week. So next week at Global Sport Matters Live, June 19th, we're going to have a discussion on threat casting. And I know you're probably not sure exactly what that is, or maybe you are. I was not. And so I encourage you to stick around and hear a little bit more, get more details after our show today. I want to second what Kendall just said. I want to encourage you to share in the chat box using our hashtags Global Sport Matters and follow Global Sport Matters on Twitter as well as on Instagram. So we've got 4 guests today. Right now, I'm going to introduce our first 2 panelists who are going to be here with us. We have Renata Semril, and Renata Semril is the Executive Director of LA84 Foundation. She's joining us from LA. Thank you for being here with us today, Renata.
Pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
And we also have Dr. Ahada McCummings. And Dr. Ahada McCummings is the Sports National Director of Up to Us Sports. And she's a part of and running the strategic partnerships. And she's joining us today from Raleigh, North Carolina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So with what we're going to be looking at, the future of youth sports, I want to start with just getting a better sense of your organizations. So if we'll start with you, Renata, tell us a little bit about LA84.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, or Dr. Brooks, I should say. So the LA84 Foundation is the legacy of the 84 Olympic Games. And for 35 years, we've been using sport as a mode of engagement to give kids in underserved, under-resourced communities an opportunity to experience what we believe is the transformational power of sport. So when you think about building a bridge to a brighter future, the benefits from a health and socio-emotional standpoint, all of those elements and the gaps that exist in communities that can't afford those sports is really what we try to help, making sure that all kids have an opportunity to play. And since our founding, we've engaged with about 2,200 nonprofit partners throughout Southern California. So from San Diego to San Diego County, from Santa Barbara to San Diego County, we've impacted about 3 million kids, and we've trained about 80,000 coaches. And so certainly, impactful work over our 35-year history since the 84 Games were here in Los Angeles.
Fantastic. And so your scope of programming, what could we expect if we go? I've been to one of your wonderful, convening days where you bring in the people that you all are funding. You brought in, I believe it was Julie Foudy was the MC when I was there. Tell us what is underneath LA84. What are all these organizations that you are helping?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. I'd like to say that we are the backbone infrastructure for the youth-based sports development ecosystem here in Southern California. And so we have partnerships with YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, community-based organizations, school-based organizations, and municipalities. And really our work is about helping to create the conditions for kids to succeed. So when you think about, positive mentor, those opportunities to develop resiliency, grit, and that growth mindset, and then, making the connection between hard work and success. And if you overlay structured sport with competition elements to that, those are the conditions that help kids overcome obstacles. And certainly as a high school athlete, I certainly benefit from that, sitting here as the president and CEO of the L84 Foundation. And then we also, so we focus on funding those organizations, but then also, making sure that we engage in appropriate coaching education and providing those opportunities. And in fact, Up to Us is one of our coaching education partners. And so we provide grants to organizations like Up to Us to scale those coaching programs for free to our grantees. We also do infrastructure development. So certainly access to fields of play in communities of color and minority and poor communities, aren't always the same in other communities. And so when you think about soccer fields, futsal fields, baseball fields, softball fields, we also engage in that work. And then the final thing that we do is really research and convening, is acting as a national thought leader in terms of the prevailing issues in youth sport, and how can we all come together to ensure, not just in our region, but nationally, where we see some inequities in sport, a lot of inequities in sport, how can we come together and drive much needed awareness and, more importantly, resources into those communities who need it most.
Fantastic. And the Play Equity Fund, can you talk a little bit about the Play Equity Fund?
Yeah, sure. When I took over the foundation about 4.5 years ago, I'm a Southern California native, third generation Angelino, and I can remember vividly having sports in middle school. I was able to go to the park, and for $25, I can play basketball. I was on the tennis team in high school. And those opportunities aren't a bygone conclusion as they once were for me and a lot of other folks, I know on this call. And, it dawned on us that while we have the benefit of a small endowment as a result of the 84 games, the need far outweighed what we had to provide to our grantees. I mean, we could triple the amount of money the foundation has, and we still wouldn't be able to, drive change, particularly when you think about the disinvestment in school-based sports, and other enrichment programs. And so we started to shift the narrative of our work and talk about the crisis hiding in plain sight, that not all kids have equal access. And we coined the word play equity, which hadn't been put together, really to frame a narrative around the work that we do, the work that our ecosystem does, not just here in Southern California, but then also linking that youth sport ecosystem across the country. And so, I know you'll get to a later question about what sports teams are doing to respond to, the recent civil unrest and protesting around police brutality. And it's really Play Equity standing up as that umbrella to say the work that we do and a lot of other organizations do is about closing the play equity gap to ensure that all kids have an opportunity to play. And so it's looking to bring resources in, drive awareness, and then starting to focus on advocacy. Just in the state of California, the governor's budget, and I know a lot of other states are dealing with budget crises as it relates to, closing down the economy. And they're projecting to take $100 million out of after-school programs, including sport, and another $18 billion out of the K through 12 system. And we've seen in times, previous times, that when that happens, it's those things that they think are non-essential, like enrichment programs, like sports programs, the programs that get cut out. And certainly, our school district in the state of California has been cut to the bone, if you will. And we just can't have, any more cuts if we're really going to look at driving those system changes and creating those conditions for kids to succeed. And so the Play Equity Fund is taking a more active role in advocacy and really driving for system changes, if you will, and funding where it's needed most.
Yeah, that's really essential, and it's tough to hear, the idea that we're going to cut sports funding more. I was a high school coach, both on the boys and the girls side. I've watched high school sports really be on a decline, schools wondering if they should just keep varsity, no longer have JV and freshmen. I've seen teams particularly on the girls side in basketball, they just didn't have enough girls ready to compete, weren't as interested, and they weren't funded. So that's really hard to hear.
Yeah, and Scott, if I could just, I know 3 million kids and the impact that we have, and I like to say that we look to change communities one kid at a time. And, I'll just share one young man. He's now actually studying for his PhD, Kylan Moore. Kylan Moore was a young kid, 12, 11 years old, that came through a football program, the Southern California Falcons, that we funded. And if you look at the data and statistic for African-American males, 59% graduate from college. 1 in 3 can expect to go to prison in their lifetime. They're 2.5 times more likely to be suspended for school. And so those obstacles are really challenging. He and his family, economic challenges, his mother was abused, father was in prison. So all the statistics that we, consistently hear. And this football program really wrapped him around positive coach mentors, engaging them in internships, really those things that kids need to thrive and survive. He thought he was going to go to the NFL, as many kids in urban communities think. He wasn't football material, and so his backup plan, he became a Rhodes Scholar. He went to TCU, graduated, went on to become a Rhodes Scholar, started a youth sports organization, helping other young kids like him and really using his story to inspire. And, when I had occasion to talk with Kylan, he came to our summit a couple of years ago, he said to me, Renata, football wasn't my life, but it saved my life. And I think when you hear that story of a young man like Kylan and what he's doing now to contribute so positively to society and is making such an impactful change to many youth across the country now, that is the transformational power sport. That is the importance that we're trying to bring awareness to of why sports and enrichment programs aren't nice to haves, they're must haves in communities that we serve.
Yeah, and I think that's a fantastic lead in to bringing in Dr. McCummings. You're with Up to Us. You all are a coaching and a mentoring organization. And I remember seeing Kylan in his presentation and him talking about the impact of his coach. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your program, Up to Us, and what you all's mission is?
Sure. So our mission really is to identify and train coaches that are working in underserved communities. We're the only national service program, sports-based youth development program. And so we place AmeriCorps coaches in those communities in which they live in. And we're training them on trauma-informed care, which is so important within Black and Brown communities, that our communities are being exposed to so many things that kids are being affected by. And so we really want coaches to be able to identify what that trauma is, what those stressors are, but then also be able to work with students and communities so that we're not just focused on bad behavior or why they're doing the things that they're doing, but that we have a clear understanding about the effect of trauma and what they're dealing with in their communities and how it affects their behavior within their sport and within their lives.
Yeah. And that's so important. One of the things we continue in sports to rely on this idea of the power of sport, but we're not deliberate like we need to be, right? And you look at one of the national reports that came out in October, and it was about youth sports, and it explicitly stated that we need to be deliberate and intentional in trying to make sure that these positive aspects are felt by these children. We can't just pretend that throwing them on the field with balls and whatever the equipment is, that it automatically leads to good outcomes, right? It has to be deliberate and intentional. And it's powerful to think of your training and having coaches do some kind of an assessment and evaluation, right? To really kind of triage what's going on and how can we help these children best. I think that's very important. I know that you all are especially concerned with what's going on with girls, and that's, a gap that we see. What are some of the pressing concerns that you have with girls' sports participation?
Sure. So for me, the pressing issue right now is, all of the things that we know that are happening with girls in sports, and that is that girls are dropping out at twice the rate in youth sports than boys are. At around 13, 14 generally is around that age where girls decide to check out. And so my pressing concern right now is that with the pandemic happening, with the protests that are happening, with all of the things that are stressors that are happening right now, my fear is that we're going to see those numbers increase, that girls are going to drop off at an even higher rate. We've got to find ways to re-engage them into sport. So as everyone is thinking about re-engaging into sport, my concern is, what's this impact going to be on females, on our young girls who are already concerned about safety, who are already concerned about their transportation and how they're going to get to their sport, who are already concerned about all of these things that girls are concerned about in sports and causes them to drop out. What's going to happen now that they've been gone? They've been gone for quite some time. They've not been able to attach to their sport because that was what was getting them through initially. And now they've not been doing that. And so are they going to get to a point where they say, yes, sports are back, I need this, I need to get back to my sport? Or are they going to say, you know what, I've engaged in some other stuff, right, and I've got some other stuff going on, and I'm going to go that route? So that's my major concern, that this pandemic, that this state that we're in right now is only going to facilitate those numbers and that drop-off rate increasing.
Yeah, that's really an important issue. And as you said, we're in this historic time, it's only going to exacerbate situations like that, right, for young women. I know that you are providing resources. What are some of the things, if someone is interested in becoming more aware as a coach, is being able to serve girls better, what are some of the resources you all provide?
Sure. So one of the resources, I'm happy to announce that we partnered with Adidas in their She Breaks Barriers initiative and our She Changes the Game initiative. And we've developed a digital curriculum specifically to keep girls in sports. It's keepgirlsinsports.com. And so what that resource is a way for coaches to figure out what are the things we need to be doing to engage in girls, to keep them playing and keep them active and keep them participating. And that particular initiative, so what we need to realize about girls and some of the takeaways from that digital curriculum are that, number one, relationships to girls in sports matter. It matters to them. It matters about their relationship to their teammates. And more importantly, it matters what their relationship is with their coach. So we're training coaches to recognize that you can't just, hone in on the skills of the sport, that you've got to be developing. You've got to have a strategy and some skills for developing relationships with girls that are on your teams. That's the first thing. The other thing is that culture matters. Your team culture matters. And, I know that we're in this era now where, these higher levels of play then foster only the best play. But for girls, that's a problem. And so girls need to be a part of a team culture that says that my development matters as well, that I may not be the best player, but I'm still having the opportunity to participate. I'm still having the opportunity to contribute, and I'm still having the opportunity to grow and develop in my sport. And so that's what this curriculum really helps coaches and anybody, really mentors or anyone who's working with girls, recognize and gain some strategies for dealing with girls a little bit differently, because our stressors are different as well. And we need to recognize that some of the things that stress girls out and cause trauma and cause stress amongst girls and athletes, we have to have some tools to help them through that, and they have to resonate with girls. So we're hoping that that's what our Keep Girls in Sport curriculum, digital curriculum, does.
And that's fantastic. We really appreciate hearing and learning more about you all's organization, particularly in this time. We know that, if you're a coach and I'm a part of a coaches network, a regular call, that this is an opportunity for us to get better as coaches, right? As adult leaders over young people. And so really appreciate the work that you all are doing. Thank you. We're going to bring you back in just a second. We're going to go ahead and move into our poll and then to our next segment. Kendall, you got a question for the audience.
I do. So we were just talking about girls participating in sport. Obviously, there's this extra layer of COVID-19 and a lot of unknowns, really. But our question for the audience is this: what should be the top priority right now to keep girls in sports? So this is a single answer, okay? This is a really difficult thing. I totally understand it. Our answers that you can choose from, and I'm going to open this up: greater diversity in coaches, mandatory training, certification for all coaches, more inclusive and safe spaces in sport. Sports should be more affordable. Can't do anything until there's a vaccine, right? Or you want me to pick just one. So we'll see what everybody says here.
Yeah, I'm kind of on that. You want me to pick just one. I mean, it seems like this is a tall task, but one helps us to understand where people are putting the value are in terms of importance, right? So what do they think is important? So that's a great question. Great question.
Yeah, it's all about the resources and where you can kind of point people. And I really commend, LA84 and Up to Us doing a phenomenal job, trying to tackle those issues head on. It's not an easy task whatsoever.
I'm gonna tell you, if you haven't been to a LA84 party, you haven't partied. You really put on a good summit. It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's high class. It was down at a LA Live, like it was there at the Marriott there. They put on a very good event.
Yeah.
Great people, inspiring stories, so it's a really great organization.
Wonderful. And we did drop some information in the chat box. I'm going to give everybody just a couple more seconds here to finish up the polling. Please do. We love the questions that are coming in so far. So keep them coming. Let us know if you don't have a question, but a comment. Please do let us know in that Q&A box as well. So I'm going to go ahead and end this now, and we're going to share these results. So when asked what should be the top priority right now to keep girls in sport, we had the winner at 31% said more inclusive and safe spaces in sport. Very interesting. Up next was what we kind of thought, right? You want me to pick just one.
That's right. That's right.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then you got the close ones behind it. So that spread kind of tells us that people were pretty split.
Yeah.
Interesting. They can't do anything until there's a vaccine. Was only at 4%. So maybe people are loosening and feeling pretty optimistic that we should be close to returning.
That gives me some hope for sure. And if there was something that wasn't listed on here, I mean, there's only a certain amount of answers we can give. Let us know in that Q&A box as we move on to the next segments.
Yeah. Thank you, Kendall. So we're going to go ahead and bring in our next two panelists for segment 2. And Bobby, I'm not sure if I've got your last name correct, if I could pronounce it. Is it Dulle?
It's Dulle.
Dulle. Sorry,
Yep.
Bobby.
All right.
Dulle, and we've got, and they'll talk a little bit about themselves, but Bobby Dulle is in his 4th season as general manager for the Phoenix Rising Football Club, also a dad, 2 sons and a daughter. And we have Eric Legg here from ASU, he's an assistant professor in the School of Community Resources and Development. And his research focuses in on the question of community sport. He looks at volunteers and he looks at particular sports, which we will get into. So I want to start with you, Bobby. For those of our attendees who are not familiar, maybe they're not in the Phoenix area, or they're just not familiar with Phoenix Rising. Tell us about the Phoenix Rising Football Club.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And as you mentioned, this is our 4th season. As a professional club here, we compete in the United Soccer League, which is 2nd division in the hierarchy of North American soccer. And I think with any organization, you have to define who you are first and foremost before you can go out and try to make an impact on others. So 4 years ago when we came together, we set out a mission as a professional club to unite Arizonans through the game of soccer and represent Arizona's diversity and come together and rise as one, pun intended. And we have to establish what our core values were, and we were fortunate to partner up with a youth club at that time that has had tremendous success at all levels of youth soccer here in Arizona, at the recreation level and multiple levels within the competitive side of things, and so we learned a lot with that partnership. So over the 4 years on the professional side, we've had a lot of success. We pride ourselves on being a brand that represents all of Arizona. Want to put a good product on the field, but more importantly, want to be a club that people want to be a part of, that they want to associate with, the culture. I continue to hear that on this panel as well. It's so important to us. And more kids that are in our youth program are not going to be professionals. It's a very, very, very small margin, right? And you have a little bit larger population that's going to become, college athletes. But we want to create fans for life. So that experience that our youth players, our participants, our families, that customer service side of things is something that we continue to stress with our coaches, with our parents, with our youth players, and that integration with the pro side, because this is something that's bigger than all of us. And we want to develop fans for life that are part of it and promoting sport, whatever sport that may be, for the rest of their lives. It's extremely important.
So it really sounds like you've adopted that European model in terms of a football club. And I want to specify for those of us who may be American-centric that when you're saying football club, you're talking about not the pigskin, but you're talking about that other round ball, right? That global game that we call soccer, but that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, absolutely. We soccer, football. I go with soccer. I grew up here in the United States, but I think one thing that's really happened over these past 10 weeks is an opportunity to look at ourselves in the mirror, right? You're moving a million miles an hour and trying to, you kind of forget about some of the processes. So this opportunity, both at the front office, on the pro side, at the youth side, we can look in the mirror and try to fine tune some of those processes. But what it's really done is to me, has brought the world closer. We're talking not only professional teams within our league, with professional teams outside of the United States, also professional sports teams, the Cardinals here locally, the Diamondbacks. We can always learn from each other. We have to listen more. We have to learn, and we can pick up best practices. So that's what we've been able to do. So while we're in the sport of football internationally, we're in the sport of life, and I think that's important that we listen and try to get better each and every day. And that's something that we've really focused on these last 10 weeks, and be prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to come back to you in just a sec, but you started talking about learning, and that obviously moves me towards the professor. So Professor Eric Legg, your research is often about, it's around community sport. And right now you're doing some work around volunteerism. What is it that your work is talking about in with regards to volunteerism? What are you studying? And what can we learn from that?
So we looked at volunteers for a national sport governing body, specifically volunteers who identified as being part of a minoritized population. And broadly, we just wanted to know, like, what's your experience like in this organization? Because we know that representation matters. It matters to growing the game. It matters to ensuring we have just and equitable and diverse organizations. So we just talked to people, what's it like being a part of this organization as a person of color or a person who identifies as LGBTQI. And I'll say, I can talk about the findings if you want, but just on a personal level, I'll say that the number of folks who thanked us, who said no one has asked what their experience is like, no one has asked what their story is, was really moving, and a reminder to myself and to all of us of just the importance to listening and amplifying people's voices.
Yeah, it is, whether you're in psychology and you're talking about the Hawthorne effect, but that effect of just listening, just kind of paying attention really does matter. I know that you do a lot of work in tennis, which is one of these sports that doesn't have a great amount of representation. From what you've learned, how do we increase that access to sports like tennis for diverse communities?
Yeah, well, I'll start by answering that for all sports. And I think Renata and LA84 really hits the nail on the head, and that's we have a play equity issue. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of the big ones is we have rising cost. So to put that into context, Aspen Institute recently pulled some data. Families spend on average about $700 a year per child per sport. So you can keep multiplying that, right, with multiple kids per sport on participation. What this means is families with incomes over 150,000, you've got about 40% participation. Families with incomes under 25,000, you've got about 20% participation. This also disproportionately affects communities of colors. Again, white kids participating in about 40%, Black, African American, and Hispanic kids participating around a third. So we've got to address this issue. How do we get here? I think it goes back to, it really started in the 80s, and this kind of new public management and this government is bad, private enterprise is better. So we divested from youth sports, from Parks and Recreation, we divested from our community organizations. Into that gap rushed a lot of private organizations. Many of them are doing great work. However, with that and add on a performance ethic, you get rising costs, travel costs, coaching costs. Tennis is certainly guilty of this. So I think we need to And I think this is a national conversation right now that's really important. We need to reinvest in our communities. We need to reinvest in the things that make stronger, more resilient communities. And part of that is reinvesting in sport, reinvesting in youth and community sport at the local level. And I think that that impact is going to spread to all sports. And tennis certainly has a historic issue with that. But I think we need to look at this holistically.
Yeah. And that tees us up, Bobby. You look at sport now being youth sport being a $24.9 billion industry. Now that's globally. It's 19.2 or so billion in the US alone. How are you all addressing this lack of affordability, or how do you all think about that? Soccer is, on one end, we think it maybe isn't such a problem in terms of cost because, hey, you just need to get your track cleats, right? You need to get those, and then you just have a ball. But how is Phoenix Rising addressing this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we do everything we can to not let someone's economic background get in the way of them participating in any of our programs. We have scholarship programs. We have we do quite a few fundraisers as a youth club. When the pro club that's much younger than the youth club was established years ago, when we came around, it was very important for us to start establishing ways to raise money to help participation numbers. We want to grow from a business side. We want to grow the Phoenix Rising brand. And in order to do that, we want to have more people that have a chance to experience the brand. And what can we do that? We can lower the costs. So things that we're doing at the professional level translates into the youth level. So maybe some of the volunteers that were focused on some of the administrative things or focused on now social media, those are things that we've taken on as a pro side to help sell sponsorships, to help build plans, to help do an apparel deal that translates into the youth club that frees up some of those volunteers to do other things. And we do big charity ball on the first team that all those proceeds go to our youth. And then just this past January, our ownership group is now investing in a funded academy. And so now you have the recreation program that we try to keep extremely affordable. And then again, people can apply for scholarships, and we're able to grant about 4 to 5 per team, which I think is a very high number when looking at the rest of the numbers out there. But now we're going to have a rec program, we have a competitive program, and then we have an academy program. Again, the tiered approach, and the academy program will be funded in full, so that, again, anyone from any type of background, we're ultimately looking for the most talented individuals, not for the individuals that can pay the most money. So I think creating opportunities at every level, and trying to expand our reach and our programming through affiliate programs, through camps and clinics, through working with our partners to roll out different initiatives. I think that's our way to get out there and try to introduce people to the sport, or sports in general, to be active. And whatever they do after that, we just want the sports to be involved, a part of their lives as they move forward, because it teaches us so many great life lessons. And Renata told a great story early on about one of the individuals, the background that he came up in, and what he's doing now. So whatever it is, we want a good experience. We want to introduce the sport, and we don't want money to be a factor in why someone doesn't participate.
Yeah. So talk to us about what you all are doing right now. We had a conversation a few weeks back, and I really kind of got excited to hear how you're doing social distancing and are back. You guys have phased in correctly, at least to some extent. Tell us what that looks like.
Yeah, so we're actually in phase 2, similar to other businesses, other facets of life right now that are opening, right? Whether that be restaurants or retail outlets. Youth sports are the same thing. So what we've did is, it was initially, I think the most important thing that we've communicated every time is this is optional. It's really important that parents don't feel pressured, that kids don't feel pressured that they need to participate, because sometimes they have to go to a different location than they're used to. Sometimes, the parents can't get out of the cars now. So we implemented a lot of different policies to make people feel comfortable. At the end of the day, as we say on the professional side, where we hope that we can have fans attend in some form or fashion, we cannot eliminate all of the risk. What we can do is we can mitigate as much as possible, communicate, and be flexible, know that times are changing. What we implement and put out, we can't get too far ahead of ourselves and say, this is what it's gonna look like in September, because we don't even know what it's gonna look like next week. So we initially started with individual training, bring your own ball. This is at the youth level and the pro level. Bring your own ball. We put up grids, 10 by 10 grids all over the field. We lessened the number of kids that are on each and every field. 30 kids on one soccer field. If for any of us that have ever driven by a park at night and seen youth participation, I think courts, fields, there's not enough. I think that could be a whole nother topic we could discuss. But so for us, is we really limit the numbers. We condense the time period. We, of course, ask the screening questions. We ask the parents that they take the temperatures of their kids. And we ask the coaches that the coaches are required to wear masks when they're out there. There's no shared water. There's no shared balls. There's no shared pennies. Individual work is all they could do. We did that for about 2 weeks and we progressed, and now we're into groups of 4. We're still staggering it. We're trying to keep the same groups together. Again, staying away if you're sick, asking those same screening questions. So we have not gotten to games at the youth level. We haven't gotten to games at the pro level, but it's a lot of health screening questions. It's a lot of communication and education, and ultimately it's a phased approach, and hopefully the phases continue to progress, but in each phase we can flex up or flex down. And we just have asked our parents to bear with us as we're all learning and going through this together.
Yeah, and I think that that's very important. This patience, sounds like you guys have had a very good plan and given them a lot of options, and I commend you for that. Professor, when you think about the long term, I'm going to ask you the big question. What's the long-term impact of this pandemic on youth sports?
Yeah, that's the big question, Scott. So thanks for that. There's an optimistic side of me and there's a cynical side to me. I'll start with the optimistic side, and that's I'm hearing people talk that this is an opportunity for a reset, right? This is a chance for us to go back to localized, community-based sport. People aren't going to want to travel. They're not going to want to spend the big money to do the travel. So this is our chance to really get back to sport, and the primary purpose of sport being for youth development, life skill development. And that's what I hope happens. I hope we're reflective during this time. We realize how important sport is to it, and that's what happens. What I fear happen, and I don't want to be doomsday, but I think we need to be aware, is that it actually exacerbates the haves and have-nots. Right? The folks who have the resources to take the protections, the folks who have the resources to do this, continue on, and those who don't are left out. And again, I don't want to be that cynical person, but I think we need to be aware that that could happen. And if we're not aware that that could happen, we won't address it.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important point. We're going to transition a little bit into looking at a poll that we did, the Global Sport Institute. We did a international poll, and there's some statistics that we'd like to show you all. Crisol, you have those statistics for us. So, and I'll start with actually something that's not here. To your point, Professor, when we polled people around the world about what they were doing with their children, those who had higher economic, socioeconomic status were investing in things like private training, whereas those who didn't couldn't, right? And so that's a very important point about the haves and the have-nots. So you see our question here, and all of this were the concerns about getting your kids back into sport. You have 62% said that due to the concerns of catching coronavirus, they will not be putting their kids back into organized sport, right? Now, there is a time frame where there's some conditions here. So until there is a coronavirus vaccine, at 63% said that that's what they would need. Then we asked about their children's anxiety, right? If they're being cooped up and they're not allowed to participate in sport, is this creating more stress and anxiety? and we got 72% said yes, that this was. Thank you, Crisol, for showing us those poll numbers. So we see that we're headed into, perhaps while we're going into this pandemic, we've had this stoppage and we may really be hopeful. We know we've got challenges on the other side. And as we've alluded to in our very first session, we also have these challenges that had already existed, right? So we have pre-existing challenges that may have been, in many cases, have been exacerbated, but we are optimistic. I think as a sports community, we're optimistic that perhaps we've learned some things. We've had a moment to take our breath, as Bobby talked about, and that maybe we'll be able to fix some of these, but we'll have to wait and see. All right, you all hold tight. We're going to bring our next guest back in just a moment. Kendall, we've got a second polling question, right?
Yes, we do. So talking about, what are people doing now? We kind of wanted to get a sense, what are you and your families doing? And I think, it is very interesting what our global poll was asking about, like if you have the means, you're going to put your children into something a little bit more specialized.
Yep.
Things were put on pause. So what have you and your family been doing during this quarantine? Let us know. We're going to launch this poll right now. So we've got answers ranging from all day, we're putting in the time. So congratulations, you're putting in the time. Walk a day is keeping us going. It's that mandated, walk a day, all of that good stuff, getting the sun, some good vitamin D. Sometimes there's an effort to get outside and play. Sometimes maybe not. Many of us, this is myself included, we started out strong, but not so much anymore. And then kind of where I'm at, who has the time? Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that I've definitely been trying to do the walk a day. It's up and down for my kids. I've got a 23-year-old, 19-year-old, and a 15-year-old. The 15-year-old is heavy on some Instagram or Twitter fitness that she's finding with some celebrity that she's enjoying, and she's working out hard. But that goes up and down. She has good weeks and she has bad weeks. I think that the walks are helpful because they give us an opportunity to actually talk, right? So there is just the playing and getting out there, but I think talking and trying to understand what they're feeling, not only because of the pandemic, but because of everything that's going on, the concerns around the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and, Tony McDade and the like. I think that we really do have to spend this time. So it's an important question.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're going to give it a couple more seconds here, and I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. All right, let's see what the results are. All right, I think everybody's with you guys. A walk a day is keeping us going. 40% of you agreed with that statement for how you've been keeping active during this time. Second up, we've got sometimes there's an effort to go outside and play, so that's good. Third, we've got all day we're putting in the time. And we've got this is really good too. People seem to be making time or realizing they do have time, because only 3% said who has the time. Yeah. That's all we've got right now, right?
That's great. I mean, we need to be making sure that we're taking our time to step away from all of these Zoom calls, from all the busyness, right? So that's great. I'm glad that people are getting out there. That's healthier for us.
And I think to your point, it's not just a physical thing, it's a mental thing. And that's exactly what our poll results were showing was, kids are really feeling the effect, and, current events and, pandemic, it makes an effect for sure. And we need to be talking about what is that long-term and how do we give them skills to be able to cope with that now. So, I mean, this is exactly the great field of experts to talk about this. So absolutely. I'll leave you to it for the final segment.
All right, great. Let's bring everybody back. So we'll bring back Renata and Bobby and Dr. McCummings and Dr. Legg. Thank you for being with us again. We're in a historic moment, right? It's not just about this pandemic, about COVID-19. We're also seeing the whole world respond to the killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Tony McDade and others, right? This continuing. While we have these protests in the streets, we're also seeing athletes and sports organizations responding, and people are are looking at this with mixed sentiment. There are some people who are very optimistic and feel good about it. You know, writer Mark Spears says that sports organizations are making statements and promises that he's calling receipts, right? He's saying these are receipts that we can use to hold them accountable later on. And so, you know, they're apologizing and lending support to Black Lives Matter. Some are writing these action plans to address what they see as the diversity issue. What are some of the things that you all are doing, and what are some of the things that, you know, if it's not about your organization, what are some of the things that we should be doing in terms of action plans? What is going to help us to hold organizations accountable to these receipts?
I'll take that. I'll take that. You know, I think just something, you know, if that's engaging in conversation with someone that you don't, you know, normally engage in conversation, and trying to understand, you know, the plight of poor and minority communities, but particularly African-American communities, and the unique experience, unlike any other immigrant to this country, that African-Americans have, you know, have endured over the last, you know, 400 years, I think is a, you know, as a start. I certainly am having a lot of conversations. I think the second is with, and I think many of the organizations have put out statements to say that they stand with Black Lives Matter. Certainly the L84 Foundation and our Play Equity Fund have done so. And then I think thirdly is just find where you can, you know, work within your ecosystem to provide opportunity and access. I've been encouraged to the point you mentioned, Scott. Athletes are standing up. I think LeBron James and a number of athletes are, you know, focusing on voter registration and voter mobilization, which is huge. You know, Adidas announced a pledge for $120 million for Black communities across the country and a scholarship program for their employees. You know, another huge step. And I'm encouraged just in our region that the 11 sports teams in Los Angeles and even sports teams in Orange County, you know, have engaged in conversations with us and with their foundations of how they can use sport for social justice and really make this moment count. So I think, you know, certainly I like your analogy of receipts, because we have to hold them accountable. I worked in Los Angeles after the 1992 riots, and you know, I like to say that, you know, after about a few years when the smoldering stopped and the protests went east of the 10 freeway, you know, we kind of went back to business as usual. And I think this is incumbent upon each and every one of us, you know, to ensure we don't go back to business as usual, but we see the system changes like funding for education, like bringing sports back to school is the change that we're working toward, and we hope to see, you know, over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, great. Bobby, what about you? What are you all doing?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we had to listen. We have a team on the field that's made up of 13, 14 different countries, guys from all different backgrounds, and have come up and been raised in different situations. And then they've played all over the world. A lot of guys, this is not their first stop. So for us, it was dialogue. And in fact, and that's dialogue between ownership directly with our players. Very transparent in this organization, and accessibility is important. So we were, of course, we issued this statement. We support. I mean, what's going on is terrible, and we support that. And we know that we need to be part of the solution, and we need to help. We need to listen. So what we're doing is talking to our players, talking to our fans, trying to understand what would be the right thing to do as our an attempt to assist, right? And in, you know, whether that's merchandise programs, whether that's partnership programs, whether that's diversity programs within the front office, all those things are things that we're doing. But first and foremost, we're taking a step back and we're listening. And if there's anything, I think in our youth world, right, educating, right, and making sure that there's swift action. We do not tolerate it at any level. And I think that's important, that there's consequences for that swift action, and we need to be comfortable as an organization with those consequences. Whatever those consequences are, we don't tolerate it, swift action, and we live with that because we know what we stand for, and humanity is what we stand for.
Yeah. You know, it's one of the things, and I'm glad that you pointed out, you know, that micro level. You know, one of the things that I really study is and spend a lot of time thinking about is the everyday racism in sports. And while we've been looking at all these high levels and we're hearing from sports organizations, I have really tried to spend time thinking of plans that get down to the youth level in the everyday interactions, things that happen in terms of the sorting of athletes, putting them in particular positions, whether it's the positions they wanted to go into, you know, allowing them the opportunity to try out quarterback positions or libero positions, whatever those positions are in their various sports, looking at the microaggressions and the unequal application of rules and standards that we sometimes are not fully aware of, but when you're a youth of color, you see it happening. You don't always understand it, but sometimes the coach comes up with a rule that they've been saying, but they've only been applying to particular people. And this has an impact on you. Dr. McCummings, when this is kind of your area, right, to think about coaching and mentoring, I often have thought about how girls of color have very particular experiences.
Absolutely.
What can we do to help girls of color as the reset happens? How can we focus more on what's needed for girls of color?
Absolutely. I think, you know, this is a great time to talk about this. My daughter, I have a 23-year-old who played college volleyball and experienced racism on her team, had a teammate that called one of the other teammates the N-word in front of the whole team. And what happened in that situation was not only was that player she was suspended for a short period of time, she was allowed to return to the team. And the very next season, she was hired as a coach. And so there then becomes this idea that, yes, she's young, she's learned her lesson, but somehow the Black girls on that team, their feeling and their experience no longer matters. And so we have to start teaching girls of color that are on teams, especially in sports where it's predominantly white, and they're maybe the only African-American on their team, to call it out when you see it. So when my daughter's athletic department and the AD put out a statement saying, we stand with the Black community, we stand with our athletes, we stand, you know, and that volleyball team wrote a statement saying we stand with our teammates, she was very quick. I think with age it's come that she's become more comfortable, but she called it out. And she said, that's all well and good that you feel this way, but what are you going to do from this point forward? You can no longer sit in silence when you hear your teammates, when you hear your coaches, when you hear people in your athletic department making racial comments. Then what? That's not a team rule. That should be a university rule. That should be an athletic department rule. That's not just a team rule. That's not something that the girls get to decide. Is she coming back or is she not coming back? And so I think that it's incumbent upon us to talk to girls, particularly girls of color, and get them paired with mentors, with other girls of color, either coaches, players, people who have experienced all of these things that they're experiencing within their sport that can help them guide them through this, that can give them some ideas about how you advocate for yourself, how you speak up for yourself, how you show up for yourself within your sport. And we've got to do that. You know, I've got, within my organization, I've got coaches and girls that are in underserved communities. I've got a coach who played volleyball. She went on to play at the University of Kentucky. She went on to play overseas professionally. And then what she decided to do was come back and work with girls in the community and be a mentor to them. And so we've got to be putting resources, and we've got to say that, you know, this idea of keeping girls in sports, especially African-American girls and brown girls in sport, has to be a priority. It has to be a priority. We've got to fund their programs. We've got to help them start programs so that these girls in underserved communities have the exact same opportunities that girls in affluent areas have, so that they can continue to love their sport and grow in their sport the same way that girls in affluent communities do. And so, you know, up to us sports, what we are doing and what we've said, we've been very intentional about the words that we put out, about what we're going to do, because it can't be just words. It can't just be a blanket statement about, hey, we stand with Black people in Black communities. The fact of the matter is that up to us sports has been in Black and Brown communities. That's what we've been doing. And we're going to continue to do what we've been doing. And now we've developed a partnership with RISE, which actually came before the protests began. But now we are looking at, not only are we teaching about trauma-informed coaching, but that racial trauma is a part of that as well. And we need to incorporate within our curriculum information for our coaches about diversity, inclusion, and equity. And so that's what we are doing. We need to look internally about who are we putting at the table to make decisions about how things get rolled out in our communities. And so we can't just be talking anymore. There has to be some type of step. There has to be some type of action that has to be taken. And you can't just say we stand. Standing's not enough. Standing's not enough.
Thank you. And we see why LA84 has you as a partner. That's very important stuff. Renata, you wanted to weigh in on that?
No, I just think the importance, we talk about COVID-19 and the connection to, these protests over, the deaths of African Americans. And when you look at the pre-existing, this is just to underscore the importance of play and sport and movement, in terms of what Dr. McCummings is talking about, and really all of our panelists, is the pre-existing conditions, for COVID-19 of those who are getting it at an alarming rate are hypertension, asthma, obesity, and diabetes. And Black and Brown communities own those negative statistics. And you can see that correlation, to the number of deaths due to COVID-19. And so I think just to lift up the importance of us having this conversation, so thank you, but I think the importance of us driving action to ensure that we have access to sport, because, certainly I'm not a medical professional, but if you're out moving, if you're eating well and you're eating healthy, you're less likely to have diabetes. I mean, we see this in our middle school sports programs. And so, I think the two crises that we're developing right now, we're certainly taking this moment and taking action and bringing our ecosystem to say, let's drive change. Let's take some action to make sure that we're going to, this is going to be different this time. And I think I'm also, mindful of and sharing with our, new partners and existing partners that this change is not going to come overnight. And I think people really need to understand that the systems within our K through 12 systems, our juvenile justice system, our criminal justice systems, those things that have oppressed Black and Brown communities for years, for decades, aren't going to change overnight. So if you're going to engage in this work, make sure you have the courage and the fortitude to stick with it. Make sure you have the courage and fortitude to continue to raise awareness, both in terms of the progress we're making, but the progress we have yet still to make. And I think if we come together as a community and collectively drive for that change and take that action, I'm hopeful that we'll all make this moment count.
Yeah. I'm reminded, Coach Brian Shaw, formerly with the Los Angeles Lakers as an assistant, talked about resolve, right? And we're all called at this moment to have resolve, for us to be stronger in how we address these issues and to think about them long term. Professor Legg, when you think about this, what are some of I know you're in the space of actually working with organizations. I don't know if you've worked with them on their action plans, but what's your advice for organizations? What can they do in this moment? And particularly as we think about the role of women or people of color in coaching positions, in these volunteer positions. We know we don't have enough women in coaching at the youth level. What can we do to improve that?
Yeah, so we know how important coaches are, and the work that Up to Us Sports is doing. So I think one of the things we need to do, and we ask a lot of our coaches already, I know, particularly volunteers, but we need to include some training related to diversity and inclusion and unconscious bias. Scott, you mentioned earlier that we have to be very intentional about how we program sports. And I think too often we see sport as a panacea that solves all social ills. Those of us who love sport believe it can do that, but we have to be intentional about that. I have not seen action plans yet coming out of sport organizations. I think everybody is probably more in this listening phase. But, to Dr. McCummings' point, and I think that needs to be echoed, there needs to be action plans. Like listening is great. It's important, but we've got to get to that next step. One small way to do that is to look at some diversity and inclusion training in the way we teach and train our coaches. You mentioned women, and I'll be quick. I know we're wrapping up our time, and this also is relevant to volunteers, but we don't realize that the systems that are in place that are often informal that prevent women from coaching, that prevent people of diverse backgrounds from volunteering. Those systems are also are often I know so-and-so who invited me, so-and-so brought me along, and that perpetuates the white males in those systems. So we need to be intentional about our outreach, about our mentoring programs, and making sure it's not just who you know and an informal system.
And thank you so much. I say this each week. We could go on for more time, but we really appreciate the work that each of you all are doing. We know that you're a part of, more of an ecosystem, that you've got people you are working with. So we also want to extend our appreciation to those that surround you all. Thank you for, the impact that you all are making and for being with us today. In closing, I'd like to say to everyone, if there's an opportunity, and I'm speaking to you panelists, but also to our attendees, there's a way that the Global Sport Institute can partner with you to help figure out more action plans. We are here for that. We are doing research, but we really want to put more meat on the bones. We really want to help this to go forward. Our mission is to improve sport and everyone who is touched by sport. And so it is not simply about research for us. So we thank you all for helping to give us more things to think about, for sharing your time with us wherever you are in the world. And we hope that you fill in, you come and you look and find other ways to use the Global Sport Institute to help you all to make a difference. So if you're an attendee, please stay on and listen to get more details. For all of you panelists, thank you and good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists. This was an incredible conversation. I wholeheartedly agree. We could go on and on for a very long time on this. Thank you, Scott, for leading another great discussion this week. For those of you that missed last week, we actually talked with coaches directly. So we will definitely give you some links to be able to follow along. These are weekly discussions. The topic changes, but the conversation is still very deep and meaningful. So we hope that everybody here was able to take something away, hopefully some actions as well. I definitely agree that, this isn't a time to shut people away or off, especially those within my own white community. It's an opportunity for us to reach out and have these conversations and think about our impact in the world, because we are impacting the world. So with that, I want to tell you about what we've got going on next week. So as Scott alluded, all of us are very new to this threat casting, right? So we are actually going to be talking about threat casting the future of sport. We're dropping in the chat right now the link to sign up for that. So we're actually talking on June 19th, which is Juneteenth, by the way, just so you guys are aware, Juneteenth. June 19th, we'll talk to the father of threat casting, Brian David Johnson, about planning for the future in sport and how pandemics and social justice can impact the future of leagues, fan loyalty, and sports as we know it. So there's a lot that we're seeing. Athlete activism is on the rise. Scott, give us some perspective, things that you're seeing as well.
Yeah, well, I had a recent conversation with a group of coaches, as I keep referring to some of the coaches on our call last week. Natasha Cloud was on, Mark Spears, the journalist from The Undefeated. Natasha Cloud, a WNBA champion, a great sport athlete, activist right now. She's all over Twitter, very active and is demanding action plans. I love how she is going back to her university. She's going back to ownership and asking and really using her leverage. And women athletes, female athletes, take a higher risk. They're paid less, and yet they are, the WNBA as athletes are really one of the leaders. So, I think that we've got a lot to learn. One of the things that I'm learning and just moving more towards being older is that it is younger folks who are really impacting this, right? It is a brand new face out there in terms of protest, and it's an important moment. I like to applaud and hope for safety, pray for safety for all those who are out there. We want to keep it peaceful and keep that message strong.
Buddy, sorry, I'm on the call. Missed you.
Absolutely. All right. So please do continue joining us. And as Scott mentioned, look to GSI. How can we help you if you're struggling to figure out, if you're looking for some research, some notes, or if you're looking for those action plans, please do reach out to us. We will drop some information to contact us as well. And in the follow-up, keep us in the know. Let us know what you're thinking. What questions do you have during this time? Those are all things that we look to in our research that actually Dr. Scott Brooks, the director of our research initiative here, heads up. So looking at a lot of different things. But next week again, June 19th, we'll be back here at 11 a.m. Pacific time. That's going to be 2 p.m. Eastern, talking about threat casting, the future of sport. So with that, we will say goodbye, but we will see you all soon.